Oh.
Hey guys, welcome back to another quarantine edition of Listography. We're joined today again by Mr. Ryan Kramser coming in from Chicago.
Hello, everyone. Happy quarantine.
Today we are talking about Genesis.
Genesis. 15 albums over 2 decades or so. I listened to Genesis a lot growing up. My earliest recollections is the live albums, Seconds Out and Three Sides Live. My dad had those. I think we also had a VHS tape with them live, mostly Phil Collins stuff, and then listened to Peter Gabriel a lot more. When talking about Genesis, the big thing is Peter Gabriel, Phil Collins, kind of the split there. Which era is better? They're very different. There's not like a hatred of deciding between the two like there is maybe for David Lee Roth and Sammy Hagar for Van Halen. But you'll see from this list, can't really decide between the two.
I think I kind of disagree with that. I feel like, especially the Gabriel, people that side with Gabriel, I think they do sort of, I think almost divides the fan base even more than Van Halen. I think the Gabriel people really look down upon the Phil Collins years. Maybe the people that are into Phil Collins are a little more accepting of the earlier stuff, but yeah, I think there's quite a division.
It also just sounds weird saying that there are people that are into Phil Collins, but I think the one thing that really stands out to me, especially when you're talking about comparing the two, is how much the heart and the soul of the band really is Banks and Rutherford. I mean, they're the constant. And really, to me, I think the one thing that surprised me the most going through all of these was the musicianship is much better than I really remember. They get kind of lumped in with Emerson, Lake and Palmer and Yes and Rush, and they're not on the level of those as players. But they're definitely, they don't get a lot of individual recognition, but they're good players for sure, and that really came across. Genesis isn't one of my most favorite bands. I don't think they're quite a great band. I do think they're a really good band, and there's always room for really good music. That said, we're going to start off with a couple albums that aren't really good. They're not really good at all, and I wish they weren't even real. My number 15 is Calling All Stations. This is the one that everyone kind of forgets about. It's the one that's not Phil Collins or Peter Gabriel. It came out in 1997 when Phil kind of left to do all of his Disney stuff and whatever else he was doing. But this album is so lost in 90s pop rock. By now, 90s pop rock is more singer-songwriter, more acoustic, jangly, a little more folk influence. They're trying to do the same thing they were doing 10 years ago in the 80s with that formula without changing a thing. They don't change their sound at all, really at all. And it doesn't work. The new singer is doing this weird kind of neutered cat version of Peter Gabriel. But everything just sounds like this, and it doesn't work. I don't think there's a memorable part of the album at all. It's 45 minutes I won't get back, and that is my number 15. It was an easy choice, the worst Genesis album.
All right, my number 15 is also Calling All Stations. I don't think it's quite as bad as you apparently do. I didn't want to put this at the bottom. Part of me really wanted to be able to come on here and tell everyone that they were wrong. They've been overlooking this just because it's a different singer. But it really is the definition of non-essential when it comes to Genesis.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I do like sort of some of the songs near the beginning of the record are pretty decent. I like the opening title track, and I like Shipwrecked decently.
Oh, I hated Shipwrecked. I thought the lyrics were so tacky.
I think his vocals reminded me most of Brian May, actually, who I like as a singer. I don't have a problem with him as a vocalist at all.
Fair.
But yeah, not one I'm going to reach for often or ever.
No, I can pretty confidently say the rest of my time on this planet, I will not spend 1 second listening to one of the songs on this album. I kind of feel the same way, but not as strong as my number 14, which is We Can't Dance. This isn't as lost, and it has a lot more direction than Calling All Stations, but it really seems like an album that's completely phoned in. I mean, they became masters of putting together that formula, factory produced 80s sounding song, you know, Invisible Touch and that era of theirs. This carries over. It's just not nearly as interesting. They do some experimentation with more drum loop, but not a lot of creativity, and nothing's really memorable. Jesus, He Knows Me, and the title track, probably the strongest two. Neither songs I really want to ever listen to again. It's just a really tacky album with no rhythm to it. It's really kind of junky and discombobulated. Phil Collins' voice, who I'm not really a big fan of him as a singer, this one does not do him justice at all.
All right, for me, number 14 is Invisible Touch. So I think people quite often, you know, think that Phil Collins just like came in and turned them into like a pop band overnight, which couldn't be further from the truth. I think they really kept their prog roots intact through most of the Phil Collins years, through the 80s. This is the one album, though, that doesn't feel like a Genesis record. It doesn't feel like a band effort. It feels like a Phil Collins solo record, just a studio creation. The production's pretty cheesy on it, and I'm not a big fan of really any of the songs. Land of Confusion might be my favorite, and then Disturbed did a cover of it and destroyed it, and I can't even listen to it anymore. So
Disturbed did a cover of Land of Confusion?
Yeah.
Wow. Number 13, I've got Trespass. Not one of my favorite albums, obviously, by the placement, but it is significantly better than the bottom two. This is their second album. I don't think it's that distinctive from the first album. I like the knife on it a lot. I don't think there's a whole lot to grasp at here, but they're really establishing themselves as this folk kind of prog rock band with a lot of folk and a lot of old regal medieval kind of English textures and illusions. It's a pretty good album, but it's just not memorable enough for me, especially in the era that it's in, to climb higher on my list.
All right, for me at number 13, I'm going with their debut album, From Genesis to Revelation. This is, a young band kind of just mimicking the sounds of the time. It's okay for what it is. You got a lot of like moody blues vibes. You can hear some of the zombies in there as well. You can still tell they have some like proggy tendencies in them, but their sound, hasn't really taken shape. For me, the standout track is One Day, but this is sort of just a embryonic version of the band.
Number 12 for me is Foxtrot. By now, they're in full prog mode. I think their longest song they ever did, Supper's Ready, is on this. It's over 20 minutes long. They're really sounding like a 70s rock band as much as they can right here. They've even got some heavy organ throughout, like in Get 'Em Out Friday. I really like Under the Skies, really nice, hazy, epic opening, and then it starts to groove. Pretty good album. Playing's really noticeable here. I think a lot of times their longer prog songs are just a bit too dragging, and I don't think they alter from kind of spot to spot in their big prog epics with enough dynamic to really keep it interesting. They're also not a very heavy band at this point. Not that they ever get that heavy, but they will get heavier on their later records. So yeah, this one at number 12 for me, Foxtrot.
Number 12 for me is We Can't Dance. This record actually starts pretty strong for me. I really like the first 4 tracks, especially No Son of Mine. I think is a great opener. It seems like at the start of this record, it feels like it's going to be a big bounce back from Invisible Touch. But then after those first 4 songs, it kind of just drifts off into adult contemporary territory. It's very schmaltzy, and it never kind of returns. Yeah, it just like drifts on and on. It's super long, as a lot of 90s albums were, and yeah, it has a good start. There's some tracks that are worthwhile at the front of the record, but overall, not the best.
No, it kind of becomes elevator music, dentist office material stuff, and that's just no good.
Yeah.
Number 11 for me is Invisible Touch. Everything you said about Invisible Touch is right. It is a very shallow album. It is a computer-generated algorithm to come out with top 40 songs in the mid-1980s. I don't know if anyone else has ever thought this, but I think it's the guitar tone. Maybe it's part synth. Maybe it's a blend of the two, especially on the song Invisible Touch and kind of scattered throughout this album. Sounds exactly like the default cell phone tone you get in your cell phone. That's like the default alarm when you buy a phone. I don't know. I just think that the production is really lousy. The guitars sound terrible. That said, first 4 big hits on this are pretty good in my opinion for exactly what it is. Invisible Touch, Land of Confusion, In Too Deep. These songs all work for me. The other 4 songs on it aren't catchy. They don't have hooks. And if you're making really tacky, shallow 80s pop music and they don't have a good hook to them and you can't sing along, then they just don't work at all. That's why I think half of this album is just a really good, catchy pop record. The other of it is just completely forgettable. I think by now, like you said, they've shed all their prog tendencies, except they did try to shove in that very long 10-minute song In the Glow of the Night, which doesn't belong on this at all. I don't understand why it's on here. They don't need it. It's going to alienate the people that came in because of their singles. Other than just, how impressive that their pop music can be, not a whole lot here to work with, but I do have it number 11.
All right. So the bottom 4 records for me were what I would consider like for big fans only, people that want to like seek out everything the band ever did. For more casual fans, I would say those bottom 4 are sort of like listen at your own risk. Everything else from this point on, though, I'm going to say is sort of worth a listen. Pretty good. And at number 11, I have Trespass. To me, it's pretty amazing how they went from their debut to this, just like from being sort of emulating a lot of different things to suddenly, like within 1 year, like nailing down your sound that's going to carry you through the next decade, basically. Production-wise as well, when you listen to the debut and then this back to back, it's almost going from like black and white to Technicolor. Just sounds so much better. I think melodically they still have a lot of room for improvement. A lot of these tracks aren't that memorable, but there's some good playing on them, and it's all right. It's a decent early prog album and a good second effort.
My number 10 is the debut from Genesis to Revelation. I agree with pretty much everything that you said, and I agree that Trespass is, kind of solidifies that sound a lot more. But that's one of the reasons why I like the debut album. It came out in '69. It's the only one that remotely sounds like a '60s album. You were spot on with saying, the calls to Moody Blues and to the Zombies. You've got kind of that San Francisco Laurel Canyon sound at times. They weren't really sure what they wanted to be right now. Peter Gabriel sounds really young and cool, a little bit raw on this record. I've never heard him sound. He doesn't sound like this on any other album by Genesis or by him. I really like it. I love the opening track, When Sour Turns to Sweet. I think it's a good album. I think it's the most unique album of theirs. That and Trespass, I think, are a lot closer than you're giving credit for, at least creatively. Like you said, they're going to have a lot more room to grow melodically. But I really like this as a debut, raw. All of the, it's really the only album I think where the recordings sound like they were just live performances that they kind of grew from there and tinkered with. Yeah, I think this one's very interesting. I liked it a lot more than I thought it would. Number 10 for me.
Number 10 for me is going to be Nursery Cryme. You get the addition of Phil Collins and Steve Hackett on this record, which to me really intensifies the band's sound, makes it a lot more muscular, a lot heavier. It kind of pains me to put it this low on the list, but again, as great as some of the playing is on it, just a lot of the songs aren't that memorable melodically, and that's kind of a big priority for me. One of the things I mostly gravitate towards is melody. So I don't find it that memorable, but I do think it's a good record. I enjoy it when it's on, and for me, the guitar work on the opening track, The Musical Box, is the highlight of the record for me.
Yeah, this album, Nursery Cryme, is my number 9. I agree with everything you're saying. I forgot that Steve Hackett was on it, but you're right. This is the album that alerts rock fans to their musicianship. There's a lot more unexpected turns in their writing and playing. There is too much filler on the album for it to really be great. 7 Stones. There's even kind of filler within songs. I do like The Musical Box a lot, but there are parts of it that kind of are almost like a bathroom break, which I talked about a little bit before with some of their longer songs. My favorite's probably Fountain of Salmacis. I'm not sure what that word actually is, but I do really love the playing on here. This album, they sound like they're kind of blending in with 70s prog rock too much. This could almost be a Yes album, but the way that the guitar and the bass kind of weave in and out, it's definitely something that I really had trouble with putting on my list. It's at number 9. I tinkered with it maybe as high as number 6 or 5, because I do think that as a whole, when you're done listening to it, you're really impressed with the band. That said, like you said, not really those huge memorable moments to let it last and stick with you after a good listen.
All right, at number 9, I have an album that I am a little bit shocked at how low you put it on your list. I have Foxtrot. What number did you have Foxtrot at?
12? Yeah, 12.
Thought that would have been much higher for you. So I kind of just see them getting a little better with each record here early on. This is their 4th record. I do want to say I'm not going to, I don't want to worry anybody. I'm not putting all of the Gabriel albums down here at the bottom. But for me, this and Nursery Cryme are close to interchangeable. They're very similar to me. I think this one shows a bit more growth on their part, but sort of for all the same reasons that I had Nursery Cryme at 10, I have this at 9, just slightly bit better for me.
Number 8 for me is Genesis. I like this album a lot because this to me is the sign of the bridge between the prog rock Phil Collins and then the studio Phil Collins era of Genesis. I think the songwriting is getting really good. It's a lot more melodic and a lot tighter. They're dropping a lot of the longer songs. So the songwriting's in really cool phase. You're going to get hints of some of the bad versions of their 80s songwriting with some of the songs like It's Gonna Get Better. They kind of fall flat. But just a lot of really good songs on this. Home by the Sea is a big hit of theirs. I like that song a lot. Mama, That's All. This song or this album is at number 8. It probably would have been at number 7 if it weren't for Illegal Alien. I hate that song. I hate the chorus. It's one of those songs that is just like a gnat around your head. I can't stand that song. I heard it a lot growing up, and it literally lost a place on the list for me because of this song.
All right, number 8 for me. Sort of as we were starting to listen through all of these records, we kind of discussed that sort of the best era, even though it sort of covers multiple eras of the band, is sort of from Selling England by the Pound through Abacab, a 7-album consecutive stretch that we sort of considered their essential records. I'm actually going to extend that to the self-titled Genesis record. So these are like the 8 essential Genesis records, in my opinion. And so for kind of the worst of the best, I'm going with Wind and Wuthering. Very proggy, kind of a dark and somber record. You get what is possibly the first like true pop song in their catalog with Your Own Special Way. But for me, the 1-2 punch that opens side 2 of the vinyl version of the album, All in a Mouse's Night and Blood on the Rooftops, is sort of the highlight of this record.
I'm pretty surprised you have this this low. Seems like it would have been right up your alley for me, especially considering how much I was anticipating you not liking a lot of their post-late 70s stuff, but it sounds like you still got some more to come. My number 7 is And Then There Were Three. I think number 7 and up are the albums that I really like by Genesis. Everything before that half of it, I can get into, aside from the first 2. But to me, these are the essential 7. I don't think Genesis, that album is quite there. So many good songs on this. Down and Out, really cool opener. Undertow, Follow You, Follow Me, such a cool, just sweet romantic pop song. Say It's All Right, Joe is really cool. To me, the thing that really stands out here is how big the drums are getting. They're starting to become more of an arena rock sounding band. The guitars kind of soar in and out, really nice and smooth, and they're establishing that very hard, deliberate synth kind of sound that's really hitting on the down notes that they're going to really utilize a lot on Abacab and Duke and stuff like that. So to me, this is, like you said, the worst of the best. And then there were 3.
One spot up for me, number 7, is the self-titled 1983 Genesis album. So this is sort of a step further for them into pop and radio rock, but still a lot of really, really good songwriting. Mama, That's All, Home by the Sea, like you mentioned, and Just a Job to Do are all great. Yeah, it's hard for me to even put it this low, but it's really getting up to where there's some like pretty stiff competition coming up ahead. Less pop leaning than probably a lot of people think it is. I think it's still a pretty good rock record. Yeah, it's good.
My number 6, I lost sleep over this last night. When we attacked this list in my head, I was running through the albums and I thought this was going to be probably 2, 3, or 4. It ends up at number 6 because as much as I love it, it does have some flaws. And probably going to be surprised by this one, but number 6 for me is The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. This is probably their best overall critically received album. To me, it is the most impressive and the most ambitious. The bass sounds really good. It's recorded really well. It's a conceptual album. It's a story of a character about going through a journey. I think this is Peter Gabriel's most personal album of theirs. The lyrics are great throughout. The story told is really good. That said, I just don't think there's quite enough stuff to take away, which I think has been the problem for a lot of their albums for me. I do like In the Cage. And then to me, the biggest flaw of it is I think the album is just not nearly as good if you take out the first song on the album. Lamb Lies Down on Broadway is maybe my favorite Genesis song of all time. If you get rid of that, the album, I still really like it, but just not as quite as good as the other 5, even though I really want to put it higher because if they made 4 or 5 more albums like this, they'd be, I think, a lot more artistic and creative and a lot more accepting or accepted by a different group of people than they are. So this album, I wish they would have made a couple more like it, but it just had a little too many flaws for me.
All right, at number 6, I have, and then there were 3. This is where Steve Hackett leaves the band, which does sort of significantly change the band's sound. I would still call this a prog record, although it's sort of a less complex prog, not as classically influenced. Still some like intricate song structures and stuff, but the performances are more muscular and direct, which sort of sets the stage for their 80s output. And for me, my favorite song on this record is one you actually didn't mention, and that's Snowbound.
Number 5, I've got Abacab. I think this falls into the same category as Genesis, and there were 3, and Duke, where their songwriting has gotten shorter, but it's not, super poppy yet. They are, I think the best way to put it is a prog rock band that has really narrowed in their writing. Not really a lot of bad songs on this. Love Abacab, although I'm not crazy about Abacab as the album opener. That said, I don't really think the album of the songs that are on the track listing have a good opener. Me and Sarah Jane, Man on the Corner, Another Record's probably my favorite on the album. That said, I do hate Whodunit. I don't like Phil Collins' sort of cheeky, cute, sassy role that he does on this, and then some other songs throughout their catalog. That's my least favorite version of Phil Collins. Like I said, I'm not a big Phil Collins fan. One of the reasons why I'm not a big Phil Collins fan is I think he's obviously a very soft-sounding singer, but I think a lot of times he tries to get emotional, tries to get a growl and kind of a husky sound to his voice, which he kind of does throughout this, and that never really works for me. That said, some of the songs and the approach to their style is spot on for Abacab. This era is probably my favorite era of theirs. Also, produces some of their best live material. So number 5, Abacab.
Number 5 for me is Trick of the Tail. So here they pull off the difficult changing of vocalists. I would actually say that these first couple Phil Collins records are less listener friendly than the last couple with Gabriel. I think Wind and Wuthering and this album in particular are kind of difficult listens, whereas the albums before were actually heading in a sort of more melodic direction. But even though I think it's a little bit of a difficult listen, it does eventually kind of reveal itself to have sort of like this majestic, triumphant quality. For me, the best songs on this are Dance on a Volcano and Ripples.
Number 4 for me, Selling England by the Pound. This is a really cool emotional album. It's kind of about the loss of old English culture, really pumping in the sort of medieval old English folk culture, right off the get-go. There's no music behind Peter Gabriel's voice where he just does like, can you tell me where my country lies? And then the whole album kind of follows that. It's sort of like a big sonnet for England. Dancing with the Moonlight Night is awesome. More Fool Me, Cinema Show. So obviously those are my 3 favorite songs. So I like sort of the prettier, slower stuff on this album, but the prog rock stuff is great too. Playing is really good. This is a quintessential album. I think this is the ultimate Peter Gabriel album for Genesis. If you're going to listen to one, I think this is the one.
Right. So it is official that the 4th best Genesis album is Selling England by the Pound, because that is also where I have it.
We know that for sure, and we know Calling All Stations sucks.
Two things we know. Yeah, this is I think where Peter Gabriel's sort of melodic sensibility finally takes shape, where he's able to sort of put hooks into this sort of proggy sound that they have. Yeah, I like every song on this record. I don't think there's really a dull track or a moment that where I lose interest. Probably my favorite track is I Know What I Like in Your Wardrobe. But yeah, the whole thing's really good.
All right, getting into the top three. My number three is Wind and Wuthering. This era, this is the second Phil Collins album. Like you were saying before, kind of Gabriel's exit and Collins' entrance into the band is, kind of what seems to be our collective favorite era of theirs. This one, to me, like you said, is kind of dark and moody. And it's starting to get a lot more experimental. It's triumphant. There's a lot more layering and textures with the synth, especially compared to Trick of the Tail. It's airy and spacious. Really good songs like 11th Earl of Mar, Your Own Special Way. I love the ending with Afterglow and In That Quiet Earth. I think it's really cohesive. Maybe second only to my number one pick as the best full listen from one to final. Straight through, really good scenic album. I can't say enough about this. This was the album that surprised me the most. I knew most of my top three was going to come out of this neck of the woods in their discography, but this is the one that impressed me much more than I thought it would.
All right, number three for me is gonna be Duke.
That was my estimated number one for you.
I do like this album a lot. Again, I think I like every track on it, but to me, the thing that holds it out of the top two spots is that the flow of the tracks is a little bit disjointed. Like Misunderstanding, I think it's one of their great pop songs of all time that they ever wrote, and it just sticks out like a sore thumb on this record. I don't think it fits in with it at all. And I think some of the other poppier tracks don't really fit in. They're kind of like, you can tell they're heading in this sort of more commercial direction, but they're still keeping a foot in the past, but not blending them seamlessly. That said, it's great. That's kind of like a nitpicky reason why it's not at the top of the list.
I do think they blend a little more seamlessly. I don't really have a problem with Misunderstanding where it is. Duke is my number two. Some of my favorite Genesis songs, like Duchess, is up there. Behind the Lines is really cool rockin' opener. Man of Our Times. I like the track listing a lot, especially if you're considering side A and side B. Side B with Turn It On Again kind of opening. That's a great way to kind of reboot and get through the rest of the album. Not that you need any help. I think it's great. It's bridging that gap with keeping a foot in the past, like you said. Really cool sound and approach to the songwriting. No one really sounded like this at the time. It's kind of a shame that some of these songs didn't get more radio play. I think, that in popular rock radio, this album deserves a lot more credit. I think this album's as good as, a lot of stuff of that time. Love Cul-de-sac and Please Don't Ask seamlessly from start to finish. Really good album.
Yeah. Number two for me is Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. This is, you were talking about how Wind and Wuthering sort of surprised you, and this is the record that really surprised me. I remember listening to this album a good bit, probably when I was in like high school, and thinking it was kind of like overblown. But on this go around, I really enjoyed it. Pretty surprised at like how melodic everything was, even though it is sort of like this sprawling prog concept album. I found it to be really engaging the whole way through. Lots of hooks. I like In the Cage a lot. Counting Out Time is great. Carpet Crawlers is great. Lily White Lilith. Yeah, I just really thoroughly enjoyed it.
Number one for me is Trick of the Tail. Not even close. I have loved this album for 20 plus years. Probably in my top 10 favorite albums of all time. Love the sound of this album. I think it comes out with an unprecedented level of attitude that Genesis doesn't have on any other album. Oops. Sorry. I like the album so much, the vibrations of my voice knocked over my phone. So it comes out just so heavy with the drums on Dance on a Volcano, and Tangled mellows it out. Squonk is the coolest song they've ever done. It doesn't sound like any other Genesis song. It's almost like their version of metal. It comes out just thumping with a thunderous sort of bass line. And I think that the job they did in the studio, this is their best sounding album to me. The guitars are really rich and linger through these heavy notes and heavy chords. Ripples is probably my favorite on it. Yeah, I think this is the album that, for me, I can tolerate Phil Collins as a singer the most. That might have to do with the sound of the album. And I think his drumming is very noticeable here. This is my number one of my favorite albums of all time. There's just no other album that is like it to me, which you were saying that you were surprised how much I like this because you think that a lot of the other albums, especially like Wind and Wuthering, kind of sound a lot like this, but they don't to me. This one really sticks out. So it's my number one. Wasn't even a hard choice.
And for me, my number one, also not a difficult choice, Abacab. Probably my top 3 favorite Genesis songs of all time are within the first 4 tracks of this record.
Let me guess them. Well, one of the first 4 tracks. Never mind. Go ahead.
Yeah. I think probably my favorite track of all time by Genesis is Keep It Dark. I just like everything about this record. I think it's a perfect blend of their sort of progressive tendencies, but not in an overt way. It's a very muscular rock record. The synth sounds on this record are so good. They're like a guitar, practically. They're just really aggressive and really stabby. I think it's super catchy, the whole thing, but not in a sort of a poppy or corny way. I think all the hooks are, memorable. I don't have any issue with the tracks like Who Done It Like You Do. I enjoy them all.
Well, that's good to hear. I think that if they would have never gotten super poppy and continued the Phil Collins era with stuff like this and Duke, they'd be a much higher band on my list because the writing was still personal and they were still, being artistic with their development of their music. But it really, I hate using the term selling out. Yeah, they sold out. Shortly after this became.
I mean, I know what you're saying, and I agree to an extent, but I like the self-titled record, and after that, there's only really 2 more Phil Collins records. I mean, it wasn't like a huge amount of time that they were doing this poppier thing. I think a lot of what makes people look down upon the Phil Collins years is his solo career.
That's true.
I think that informs people's opinion of Genesis a lot.
To be fair, even though they didn't put out a lot of records after the self-titled ones, they were touring quite a lot. And they were one of the biggest bands on the planet. And that said, when they got popular and then they did do those tours, they really abandoned a lot of their old stuff, especially with, their set lists and stuff like that. And that's why they got the image and the reputation that they did.
So, gun to your head, Gabriel or Collins?
Well, Gabriel, I like more as a singer, as a solo artist. My least favorite albums. This is so tough. I think essentially I've got to go Phil Collins just by a hair, just because it's got Trick of the Tail and Duke and Wind and Wuthering. I mean, my top 3 are all Collins, but the worst of Genesis, other than Calling All Stations, is also Collins stuff. So that kind of gets into the age-old debate: does stuff you don't like about an artist ruin the overall quality of what you think of them as a whole, which is something that we can talk about at a different time. But yeah, I think gun to my head, my favorite era is, probably the Trick of the Tail through Abacab kind of. So it would be Phil. Sad to say.
Yeah, sad to say. Yeah, I think the same. I love Gabriel's solo stuff. I think it obliterates Phil Collins' solo output. But
I like Gabriel's solo stuff more than most Genesis stuff. So
yeah, but within the context of Genesis, I think I do prefer the Phil Collins era, actually.
Let's also give a shout out. Really good album art all the way through, except for maybe some of the newer stuff. Love the old album art of theirs.
Now I got to think about it. Calling All Stations is pretty bad, album art wise. And otherwise.
Yeah, and the cover of We Can't Dance looks like a $14 print you would get at Target or something. It's not very good.
Yeah, and I don't like the album art for Invisible Touch either.
It's got kind of like the
it just looks like it was made in like it's like, we can make art on computers now.
Yeah, That was, yeah, just everything about.
But prior to that, I'm in agreement with you. Yeah, it's been pretty good album art. All right. Well, let us know what everybody thinks down in the comments. Is it Collins? Is it Gabriel? Is it a mix of both?
What is? We didn't even say the name of the other singer on Call All Stations, did we?
Ray Wilson.
Ray Wilson. If anyone thinks it's Ray Wilson and just really upset that that era never took off and that they stopped after one, that would be something to see.
That would be something. Yeah. So hit the like if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe. Hit the bell so that you get notifications when we put out new videos. We've got a bunch of ideas that we're cooking up, and we will see you all next time. Thanks.